I get asked the question sometimes in job interviews, what's the biggest way that I'll be a failure here if I come to work here? If you can't collaborate with others, I just haven't seen too many people succeed coming at our environment, our culture from that perspective.
Welcome to another podcast of Stockton Delivered. Today we have the pleasure of our guest, Steve Swinney, the CEO and founder of Kodiak Building Partners. For those who don't know, Kodiak Building Partners is a private equity-backed company now with approximately 150 locations in 30 states, and they did that all in a matter of under 15 years. It's quite a feat. I'm very excited to hear from Steve of how he began and how he did that.
Yeah, you're going to hear about a company that went from one location to 140 locations, that ran a business model for his entire career that he said, I think I can do better, rewrote the book, and then put it into effect. And it was, or has been, a complete and utter success. So I can't wait for the conversation we're going to have today.
Yeah, we're going to learn so much, and he's one of a kind. There's not many companies that do this in our industry that go from zero to large and even bigger. So really cool to see how they do that. I know in our company, we're trying to grow from, 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, not from 2 to 200. So here's Steve Swinney. Good morning and welcome to another episode of Stockton Delivered. Myself and my co-host, Todd London, are here with our guest, CEO and founder of Kodiak Building Partners. Welcome, Steve, to the show.
Well, thank you. Great to be here. Great to chat with you guys today.
So I guess just to kick it off for the listeners, if you can start by just giving us a little bit of background on you and what you've been doing. And then I think I'd love to kind of explore all the things that Kodiak has done over the past couple of years. I know there's a lot of topics from growth to acquisition to consolidation to private equity. I hope today that we can cover all of that.
Well, yeah. So maybe just a little bit of background on me. We were talking about off recording here a few minutes ago. I grew up in Chicago. Went to college, though, and grad school down in Texas and got back to the Midwest for a few years. And most of my early career was in various distribution-related businesses, but not the building products distribution world. And joined ProBuild Holdings back in 2007. That was really my first experience in the space. Was at a time when ProBuild was forming and merging the three regional players that kind of created ProBuild back in 06 and 07. And then really had, kind of the roller coaster ride of the great financial crisis from 7 to 11 there at ProBuild. And what really kind of led to Kodiak and led to myself and the rest of the team founding Kodiak was really a lot of the experiences and the times there. And most importantly, I think, was just, how much I fell in love with this industry. I've never been in an industry that I so almost, so consistently enjoyed the people I worked with. Whether it was our team at ProBuild, the vendors we worked with, the customers that I met. The industry is just full, as you guys know, of amazing people. And so despite the fact that the financial crisis was my first 4 years in the space and really probably not a real rosy time to enter the industry, when I was leaving ProBuild, really wanted to stay in it. And so some of the things some of the things we learned at ProBuild, we really kind of had a vision for how to build a consolidating company in our space and do some things a little differently than maybe are the traditional ideas and tenets. And we embarked on that in July of 2011 with our first acquisition.
Great. So how many guys was it and gals to getting together to start this thing, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so it started out. So ProBuild was going through a lot of changes. All the companies in our industry were going through a lot of changes during that time. But kind of mid 2010, I decided that I probably needed to think about kind of a next step, and had always wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And I guess one of the core things was that we looked at what had transpired over those previous 4 years in the space and thought a lot about where does the industry go from here? And we felt like, there was just a tremendous amount of opportunity because what we all went through was so dramatic in 2007 to 2011. And we saw just kind of some changing landscape around immigration, frankly, the financing of the construction space. Like I said, what had transpired to really put us all through a lot of pain in 7 to 11. And we thought that created a real backdrop for a kind of a transformational time in the industry. So myself, I was leading the finance team there at the time. 3 of the guys from my team joined me to launch Kodiak. And then as we were in the process of putting together our first deal, we had the incredibly good fortune of Paul Hilbert looking at what we were doing and wanting to get involved and be an investor. And frankly, more importantly, be someone that could be a mentor to our team. We were a relatively young team. And, Paul had such a rich history in the space. And so he joined us in I guess it was March of 11. And so the 5 of us really then developed kind of that core team launching the company.
So you left a consolidator in ProBuild and you started a consolidator, but Kodiak does do it differently. Can you talk to us a little bit about what lessons you learned from ProBuild and what inspired the new strategy at Kodiak?
Yeah, sure. So, I'd say the first thing, one of the most important things you hear about us is we talk about being locally led, which even that, I think we'll probably get into this later, but we've kind of evolved in how we've thought about what that means. But that's been a core tenet. And I'd say really the biggest thing for me that led to that was that when I was first at ProBuild, I had the opportunity to go around to some of ProBuild's regions and meet with local operators and start to learn the business because it was my first time in the space. And I do remember, back then you had ProBuild, you had BFS, you had Stock, you had BMC, you kind of had this whole host of kind of large, either regional or national players. And one of the things I would always ask when I'd go into a market was, who's your toughest competition in this market? And if I was being honest, really in the back of my mind, what I was really asking was which of these national guys are the best in this area? And what was interesting was that it was never one of those names. It was always the family-owned business that they would say, yeah, those guys are the ones who eat our lunch every week. They're the toughest ones to compete with day in and day out. And so I think one of our core tenets kind of launching Kodiak became, how do you consolidate, but how do you preserve whatever is so special about all these family-owned businesses that makes them so hard to compete with in the local market? And so instead of consolidate and, the very traditional or stereotypical, maybe is a better way to say it, kind of thought of consolidation is you strip away, all of that character and legacy of these local companies and they get kind of cannibalized, and so we wanted to approach that and say, how do we be the stewards of that great legacy? And how do we find a way to put all the pieces together so you get the best of both worlds? You get what makes those local companies so successful, but you also get the benefits of scale, which are real and important to leverage. And so that really probably became the biggest lesson of what helped us launch Kodiak and the way we've gone about it.
And just to follow up, in specificity, can you share with us what that secret is? How do you preserve this family legacy while also trying to leverage economies of scale and also try to make sure that you can have all the benefits of the big company with all the benefits of the small company?
Yeah. I mean, it is a constant struggle for us. I will say it's been a real evolution. I think when we started out, I remember we really talked about this from the standpoint of saying, well, we want to be really decentralized. And that's true, but what we learned over time, and particularly as we grew, was, when you use language, you got to make sure everyone has a common definition of that. And you either got to define it or you change your language if you find out that, hey, I'm saying this and here's what I'm thinking when I say it, but here's what everyone else is hearing. And so one of the things we learned early on was, when I say decentralized, some people, they know exactly, they get exactly what I'm trying to say, and others hear that differently. And we kind of learned some people were hearing that in our organization as, oh, this is great. I sell my company and then I run it the way I want to and I do whatever I want. And we started to realize, well, that's not exactly what we meant.
Sure.
And so we started evolving to say, well, we want to be locally led. And that's not as, I'd say, a defined as a term. So that gives you then the opportunity to define it. Well, what do you mean by that? And then we started thinking about, well, how do we paint this picture better? And one of the members of our team really kind of came up with this concept of guardrails that, locally led sits in the middle of these guardrails. And the guardrails for us became, on one side, we're not going to be the stereotypical centralized command and control kind of organization that you have in your mind. And on the corporate side, we're going to commit to, we're going to strive to always be thoughtful about how we lead this company and how we make decisions together. We're never going to just start sending down edicts from above, on how you ought to do this and that and everything else. But then there's another side to that has to occur equally, or you go off the train on the other side. And that other guardrail was, we're going to be committed to making decisions that create value every day, wherever those ideas come from, with thoughtfulness about how my decisions affect the rest of the company or other parts of the company. And if we can kind of stay within those guardrails, we got all this great space in the middle to play with that finds new ways to do things, that generates best practices, that creates value together. And that's the space we want to kind of operate within. And we're going to try to stay out of the gutters on either side of that. And that's what, it's not a perfect science. It is a continuing challenge to do successfully. And with each stage of growth, I find that we have to change some of those tactics and ways of going about that. But it's been a really fertile ground for us to find new ways to do things in ways that make our, all of our people's jobs, better and faster and easier, and create more value for our customers, which is ultimately what you got to do if you're going to stay in business over the long haul.
The locally led concept is unique. When you were developing that, when you had your vision initially, a decentralized vision, right, and then turned into locally led, but was there a model? Are there other models that you could point to, like where companies have consolidated in this form, or they've left kind of each entity to be locally led or more independent, rather than like the stereotypical consolidation?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, I'd love it to be as simple as the secret sauce be that, we keep the local brand names, which we do. And we love that about our space and about our business. But, I don't think that's the magic in it. I don't think you have to do that. I don't think that's what makes it happen. I think when you look at other highly successful companies, not just in our own industry, but in others, I think it really comes down to engaging your employees. When you unpack that one and you look at companies around our nation, or the world for that matter, that have highly engaged workforces, and that have incentives that are aligned with success, you tend to really get all these things. You get adoption of best practices. You get people going the extra mile. You get you get great ideas that people actually bring to the table because they know that someone in the organization wants to hear their ideas. And so I think at the core, it has to do with building an engaged workforce that knows that, hey, I'm going to be rewarded for what I do. People care about my ideas. They'll listen to me. They want the best for me. And when you do those things, however you get there, I think you tend to get to a conclusion of a really successful organization.
I'm just one more.
Yeah, please.
Other companies and other industries that you've modeled that after, or you look up to get ideas or motivation from?
On a personal basis, I'm not sure there's necessarily any companies kind of out there that come to mind that we really said, hey, here's what we want to do. But I will say this: when I first went to ProBuild in 2007, the leadership team there was just extremely dynamic and just fantastic leaders. They are definitely some of the people that that were really mentors for me. Paul, I mentioned Paul, who we continue to benefit from. Paul continues to be, 14 years in on our board and an investor in Kodiak, and continues to be someone that I've kind of modeled my leadership after. But really the whole team that was there that ProBuild assembled back in 06 and 07, my boss there, the CFO, Tom Ryan, Michael C., who led the IT organization, Ben Phillips, who was on our board, Fred Marino. All these folks were people who really wanted to build an entrepreneurial organization, loved our industry, had a vision for creating something, big and national, and really kind of changing the way the industry worked. And I really look kind of at our early days at ProBuild as really some of the really good things that came out of that experience, and that we've tried to take and in Kodiak say, all right, maybe the timing was off and maybe some different things happened that threw us off course there, but the concept that was there really was something that we believed in, and we've continued to benefit from implementing, over these last 14 years.
I'm sure that the model is in some way, like or form, whether this industry or another, it has some type of parity. The idea of pushing decisions down to the person closest to this customer is like a really unique idea, right? It requires probably a tremendous deal of trust from your end, which I'm sure is a struggle for any senior leader. Can you talk about what the non-negotiables are?
I think the non-negotiable, number one, and very overarching, is we're here to create value. That is why we exist. That's what allows us to continue to exist. And I don't just mean that in terms of what makes the most money, or what grows the equity value of the company the most, although those are certainly components of it. But I think, and this is kind of one of those things for me, it's just there's this core, just almost, kind of human belief. I think that, we're created to contribute to this world we're in and make it a better place in all the forms and fashions that enables. And I think that when we do that, we're kind of living out a purpose. And so we really want to strive to create value, and creating value for us, it does look like those financial things. It also looks like creating a workplace that everyone you work with, they enjoy coming there more, and they're more productive and engaged in it because you're there. It means creating value is giving back to the communities that we're involved in. That's part of creating value for us. Creating value is just, us creating roles and responsibilities in our organization that allows hardworking people to come and be a part of what we're doing and provide for their families and send their kids to school and all those other things. That's all part of value creation for us. And so the biggest non-negotiable for us is that we're here to create value every day in all of its forms. And then I think there's a few other things that are huge enablers of that. And we talk about these in terms of some of our values around, I don't think you do that without being a really humble person. I just think inherently, none of us, especially myself included at Kodiak, are smart enough to have this whole thing figured out. And so if you can't be humble and come to the table to exchange ideas and think about how to create value, you're going to have a really tough time being a collaborative person, being someone who's open to the best idea coming from somewhere else than your shop. So that's really a non-negotiable for us, I think, as well. The collaboration word I mentioned there, that's a huge non-negotiable for us. I get asked the question sometimes in job interviews, what's the biggest way that I'll be a failure here if I come to work here? And that's the one I always talk about. If you can't collaborate with others, I just haven't seen too many people succeed coming at our environment, our culture from that perspective. So those are some of the ones that really come to mind. And the last one I'll just say, and I kind of will jumble this one together, I think being entrepreneurial, being driven, just really having that grit in your personality is a real non-negotiable for our culture, because what we all do every day to be successful in this business is really hard. It's not easy work. And so I think coming at it from those kind of personality traits become really non-negotiables for us.
So good answer.
Yeah, great answer.
Yeah. So you started with that one
look.
investment, and now you're at 150 How many locations is it now?
Yeah, but yeah, somewhere in the neighborhood, 140, 150 locations in about 30 states, all in probably about 45 to 50 acquisitions.
Wow. So when you first started with your crew from ProBuild, were you thinking this big? Were you thinking let's just get a couple and see how it works? Was there really this big vision? And if it wasn't, how did it morph over time to become where you are now?
No, I mean, so first of all, I would tell you where we are at today, and certainly what we kind of dream about and think about for the future of Kodiak is way beyond anything we really imagined back then. I think when we started, we did believe that there was a real opportunity here to create something special. But I think the size and scale of it, we really went into that first deal going, let's try to turn this company around and make it successful. That first acquisition. And if we do that, then we earn the right to maybe do a second and then maybe a third and a little bit more beyond that. But I don't think any of us could have imagined exactly what we have the good fortune and privilege of being a part of today.
If I've done my research correctly, in over a decade, you've grown to more than 140 locations in over 30 states. For those who might not understand the size and scale that he is referring to. Can you talk to us a little bit? What does that growing pain look like? What are the things that what is that all about? Because I would assume, and you're doing 1,000 things every single month to grow to that size and scale. So clearly the first one went right. Kudos. What happens after that?
Well, I think that's there's definitely a lot of growing pains and probably some scars along the way as well. But the biggest thing I've learned about growth over the last 14 years has really been this need to really reimagine it periodically. I only semi-jokingly say, sometimes, I've been in the same job for 14 years. And yet I feel like I've had 5 or 6 very different jobs. And I feel like every couple of years, because of our growth, we've had to kind of reinvent what that looks like. Because I do really think that, if we led this company the way we did those first couple of years, we would have been entirely unsuccessful later on in the journey. And so I kind of look at these windows of time where, sometime around 2014, 2015, we really had to remake kind of how we led the company. We did that again, probably in, I'm going to say 2018, and probably again in the early kind of post-COVID era, or coming out of 2020. And I think that was really important because, it's there's just a common sense dynamic to it. Whereas, like the first year I was in business, and we were starting out, I was running Barton Supply, which was our first acquisition. We had 75 employees, and most of them were in the facility that I showed up at every morning. The way you engage with your team in that dynamic is one of getting up out of your office once in a while and walking around and just talking to people. And, you fast forward a couple of years, you can't do that. I would never see everyone. So you have to find different ways of communicating, engaging with people. You mentioned the trust issue earlier. You have to find different ways to both have trust, but also have some oversight, have some visibility into what's going on, because of course we're going to need to course correct at times. So all those things have to change, and without really changing the approach, changing the way we communicated, changing the way we managed, I don't think we could have gone through that. And so those were big growing pains. I mean, I look back to certain windows of time where, if I'm being honest, I was miserable in my job and thought, how much longer can I do this? And then we fortunately found ways to reinvent and get reinvigorated and get things back on track that were maybe off track a little bit. and then you keep going forward. And then, after a while, you start recognizing, oh, we're kind of one of those windows again where we got to do that again.
That's very cool. So you go from 1 to 2 to 3. Whatever. Well, where's the tipping point where either you or one of the investors says, all right, time to go from 3 to 50 or 5? Where was that when that the bigger picture started saying, like, we could really scale this in a big way? And was it a person that came to you, or was it your leadership team that said, let's raise a big amount of money this time and go big? Or how did that work? And when did that happen?
Yeah, no, it was really, I think it's been more of an evolution. I mean, from we did our first equity raise, literally it was like, $1.6 million back in 2011. And then we did another one in 2012 that was 4 million. And then I think our next one was like 10, and our next one was 15. And so, it kind of just, it kept evolving and scaling. And I think in the same vein, 2014 was the first year that we really did a lot in terms of acquisitions. Everything up until then, we did like 1 in 11 and maybe 2 in 2012 and a couple in 2013. And then 2014, we did 7 deals. We tripled in size that year. And I think that year and the year following was maybe when we started getting the vision of, okay, we really got something here. And so the funny thing is, it came about, number one, we grew a bunch. And then we went through that first growing pain that I talked about, where in 2015, early 2015, I would look back on that and say, man, the wheels really fell off. And we were a mess. We were, not because of our opcos, but because we weren't communicating well any longer. And we were trying to do it the way we did in the first stage. But when we got through that and we actually kind of overcame that, I think that's when we really felt like, okay, we want to really do something really, really big and special here. And we started in 2014 doing an event called our Leadership Summit, and we get all of our operating leaders from around the company together. And at our 2015 Leadership Summit, we were about $500 million in sales, and I got up and told everyone, hey, here's a lot of things we got to start thinking about, because in 5 years we're going to be $2 billion in sales. And most of them, looked at me like I was crazy. And even as I was saying it, I'm up there saying, why did I just say that? Like, how are we going to do that? But we missed it, and we missed it by 1 year. We got there in 2021 instead of 2020. But I think that was when we really kind of started to think more about, all right, how do we really take this to a whole next level beyond what we started out imagining? And then that came with other decisions where we did, in order to do that, we were going to have to kind of access the private equity market, because our investor base up at that point was really individual investors and the kind of the traditional friends and family kind of folks, and that wasn't going to enable us to go to the levels we are today. So that was another thing we had to change.
Do you want to talk about the pros and cons of being PE backed?
Sure. Yeah, sure. It's so I guess to put it in a little context, this is my third company to work for, be a part of that was private equity backed. ProBuild was the second. And then way back earlier in my career in a different industry, I was working for a company that was private equity backed. And look, I mean, I think I think it's both of what you said. They're not all bad. They're not all good. It's like anything else in life. I think, there's a saying about our form of government that it's the worst form of government except for every other form of government that exists. And I think, everything's like that. I mean, private equity, I think, can be a huge enabler and accelerator of a great business strategy, and a great business vision. It can also be a disruptor to one. If the fit and the trust and the thinking and the alignment of how you're going to grow the business isn't there, it becomes a huge disruptor to that. For us, I think we took a long time to really think about who was going to be the right fit when we stepped into that in 2017, and we did a lot of research. We did a lot of relationship building. And then maybe most importantly, and this is the hardest thing to do, I think, is we were really, really honest in those conversations. And what I mean by that is, like when you go into those conversations to raise capital, you are in sales mode. And so you tend to want to, emphasize all the positives and the things that the customer wants to hear. And, I think for our model, we made what was a tough, but in retrospect, an incredibly valuable decision. Was we're going to be completely honest with these investors that we talk to. And you know what? If it's not for them, then it's not the right fit. And we'll just keep doing it until we find the right fit. And so we had a lot of discussions with our current partner, Court Square, over the course of about a year. And we talked a lot about some of these things we talked about at the outset of this podcast: the locally led leadership, how we think about technology, how we think about incenting our employee, all those things. And what we found was a ton of alignment. And I remember on the day we closed the deal, December 1st of 17, I got my team together and I said, look, we're about to embark on a new phase here. It's going to look very different than it has. I think we've been really transparent. And so, I think based on that, we've got a really great partnership. And the great thing is, I think that if these guys are 80% of what they've kind of said they would be, we're going to have a really successful partnership here. And I have to say, to their credit, they've been as close to 100% as I can imagine. And as a result, that partnership has really fueled a lot more growth as opposed to getting in the way of the growth.
It feels like this concept of being humble in your everyday and being humble with your investors has paid out multiples and across everything you're doing.
And so I know not all private equity is created equal. You said some are bad, some are good. So the ones that you work with, how involved are they in the business? Are they letting you operate? Are they heavily, are you guys together often, planning, strategizing, doing mergers, deals? How does it all work?
Yeah, I think what works in our model and our partnership together is I think we talk about all the big things and we just it really, when you think about it, what I'm going to say is it's very much like our model with our businesses. I would say they adopt a very locally led approach, and the terminology I would use. They're great investors, they're great board members, and they're great at thinking about and challenging strategy. And they really focus on that. And so those are the locally led things that we want them, really front and center on. And then to their credit, they have placed a lot of trust in our team to really run to the day-to-day business and execute that strategy that we're aligned on. I think as a matter of practice, we have a quarterly board meeting. Beyond that, we pick up the phone and they do the same, as little as we have to, but as much as we need to. And as a result, I think we maintain a really good dialogue. Doesn't mean we always agree on everything that we're going to do, but I think by and large, they have been supportive of trusting us and empowering us to run the business and make decisions to create value. And then we have some really good and healthy debates on the big topics and the big strategies. And, we keep at it until we come out with some alignment. Where's
Kodiak heading now? You said 2021 you had roughly $2 billion. I'm sure you're a little bit bigger now. Are you going to continue? Are you going to double your size? What's the next step?
Yeah, I've been asked that question a lot in terms of like what's the end game? What are you trying to get to? And I will say this: we, at the core, what I want for Kodiak, I want us to be the best company in our industry. I don't really care for the biggest or not. I do believe that there's something that tends to come over time with being great at something. You tend to get bigger, you tend to get more substantial. And so, but I would candidly never want to sacrifice who we're trying to be for the size of what that becomes. That being said, I think we really believe in what we're doing. We love what we do every day. We love what we're building. We love the value we're creating in all those forms I talked about. And so, yeah, I mean, given that and given where we see the industry going, we fully expect to double or triple in size, kind of during the rest of this decade.
So, Steve, we have a couple of segments we do every podcast. They're all rightfully double entendres for lumber. The first segment we do is called Saw It Coming. It's about future predictions. So even at Kodiak's current size, you're still in a hyper competitive environment. You have huge national players, you have big box, you have the scrappy local independents. What is the one, or you have QXO potentially buying Beacon over the next, right? You got a lot of crazy stuff happening. Sure. What is the number one disruptor that you see really impacting this industry over the next 5 years?
I don't know if it's a disruptor so much, but I think I guess I'm going to answer that as kind of what is an overarching trend. And I do believe, we were talking about this back when I joined ProBuild, but the whole consolidation of the whole construction space, and whether that is just within lumber yards, which is our biggest part of our business, or kind of the convergence of models like ours that have multiple segments of construction supplies in them, to the home builders consolidating, to, as you said, someone like QXO coming into the equation. I think we all have to be real about that trend has really pressed, and I think is kind of, we've gotten to a place where it's inevitable that that's going to very much continue. I believe that, if you look at 10, 15 years ago, or 10, 15 years from now, you're going to have a handful of 30, 40, 50, $60 billion revenue companies that are trying to, solve the problem of the builder, the pro dealer, in just about every product category, and thinking about the supply chain, thinking about the labor components of that. I do think that is kind of where we're headed, and there's a ton of implications for that. The implications for an independent are very significant in that you're going to have to find ways to, you're going to continue to be scrappy, but if you're going to remain an independent, you're going to have to find some really creative ways to try to level the playing field with someone who can invest a lot more in technology and things of that nature. So I think that's one implication. I think there's an implication that just getting big and being in a bunch of different things isn't going to be a winning proposition, but the winning proposition is going to be really thinking holistically about how to fundamentally transform how the supply chain operates. Because I think we as distributors kind of operate in this really, really neat and integral space between a manufacturer and then the ultimate builder. And we should be the connecting point for how do we think about how the whole channel works together in an effective way and in a way that gives you a competitive advantage. So I think that's a holistic kind of theme that to me is really, really critical to our space going forward. And then, I guess the last thing in all of that is that we're always going to keep coming back to is, all right, if all that's going to happen, how do you build an engaged workforce that knows what they're there to do every day, buys into it, knows that they're cared about in such a way that they really want to go the extra mile to help the team win?
It's a great answer I mean, both parts, but the first part, it also makes me think about our business, right? We're part of the supply chain. We're a middleman. So right. More consolidation on your side, on the retail side or the dealer side. What does that mean for a middleman? Whether it's us or anyone else, it doesn't make a difference. I think there's question marks there as well.
Absolutely. It affects all of us. Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and it's very interesting where we end up. I'm really interested how that goes. Because I do agree with you that it's just beginning. We're in the middle of the game.
We are not in the ninth inning of consolidation.
Yeah. You still have a lot more to go. If you had to bet on one major shift in how customers buy building materials, what would it be?
I think it would be, I definitely think it's technology, but I think it's about, I think it's less about big flashy changes in how we use it, and it's more about how do we effectively use it to make everyone's job very, much more simple and streamlined and productive. I mean, I think it's the blocking and tackling of it. Integrating the bidding process. You think about, if you kind of just go into your operation or mine, and you think about kind of how business happens. We did this actually back in 2011 when we first acquired Barton. One of the first things we did was get the whole team together, and we went down in our basement conference room there, and we said, we gotta remake and lay out how we run the whole business, because we're going to double in size in the next few years, and the way we're doing it, it'll just be a mess. It'll be crazy. We gotta figure this out. And so we went literally over a course of a couple of days, and we literally took a transaction and every last piece of it from the very start all the way through. And we went around this entire conference room, sheets of paper by the end of it. And and I go back to that, even though it's 14 years ago, I think at the core, you look at back what we were doing there, and to some extent what we still are, in terms of all the steps and all the repeat things that happen, the redundancy, the writing it down here and then having to write it down over here, or even, pulling the data out of this system, but then we got imported into that, all the way from when, out on the job site, they're building the materials list that they're going to need to have and the timeline of it. I think the ability to utilize technology, excuse me, in a way that just fundamentally streamlines all that, takes all that waste and all that repetitiveness out, and lets us as human beings just do the real important problem solving of it, and the relationship building that you can't automate, and probably shouldn't. I think that's the thing that is going to be transformational to how our industry operates over the long haul. And it's going to be critical. It's going to be our part in solving the affordability crisis, which we won't solve it by ourselves, but I think that's our core role in solving it.
So our second segment is called Material Moments. These are questions geared around personal stories. To kick us off, what would the best piece of advice that you've received so far that kind of helps shape the way that you think about the industry?
I'll have to go with the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, just from a business standpoint, period, has been way back. And I really do. Someone asked me one time, like, kind of where was my first idea about Kodiak? And it wasn't Kodiak in itself, but it was the concept. It was literally, I was in college. I went to small private school in Abilene, Texas, Abilene Christian University. And so I was probably a junior in college, and we had this really, really phenomenal investor that came to campus, and Richard Rainwater, and he's passed away. And we were way too small a school to get a guy like this, but his daughter went to our school, and I think that's how they got him to come and speak on campus. And I remember back then he got up and talked about what he did, and I just remember, like, number one, thinking, how do you get to do that job? Because that just sounds really fun and exciting and stimulating and all those things. But the thing I remember him saying that kind of came back to me when I was at ProBuild was, he said, as an investor, I really look for, number one, I look for really disruptive, major, events. Usually it's a crisis in a space, and things are so big that they're really going to transform how that industry operates going forward. So I look for those disruptive periods, and then I invest really big into them. And then the second piece of that was, I find great people to invest behind and back, to then implement the vision of what's available there. And when we got to 2010, and we'd all seen housing starts go from 2 million down to 500,000, and all the disruption in our space and all the chaos of it. That was really what we did with Kodiak. It was like, hey, wait a second, this is that event. We're sitting right. We got front row seats to this. How do we invest in that? How do we bet into this? And then, frankly, everything since then has been about trying to assemble a team of really amazing people to implement that vision. And we've had such good fortune with that. I mean, we could do a 3-hour podcast on the amazing people in our organization that have done so many cool things in so many different areas of the business that, I get the privilege of kind of supporting and riding their coattails for us to do what we do.
It's very true. There's so many, you have 100 or so companies, and they each have great leaders to have great stories.
You know what's weird while we're talking? Have you ever read the book Good to Great?
Yes.
They had the flywheel, first who, then what. And your investor strategy is first what, then who. And it's a very interesting take of like, here's real life, here's how an investor would think, but like the catastrophic moment to make the risk first, to make the reward of the risk make sense is probably right.
Cool. Do you have a story about a time when you or Kodiak had to pivot quickly and it paid off?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the easy one to talk about right now is, what we all went through with COVID. And I do think, I think those kind of events, they either cripple you or they accelerate what you're doing. And I know I look back to that as one of those time periods where, it made us so much better because, this, like I said, this story isn't unique to us, but, we all got up at some point in March of 2020 and we didn't know if we were going to be out of business for 3 or 6 months and then we found out we kind of, I remember with us being in multiple states, we did this like almost every day for about 2 or 3 weeks where, well, maybe we're going to get shut down in this state and they're talking tonight and we're going to know. And almost always, we'd breathe a sigh of relief because, okay, the doors are going to be open tomorrow. And then as soon as you breathe that sigh of relief, you have this gasp of, fear a little bit of, well, how are we going to be open? Because, we're not going to, you don't do our business from your living room. You go in every day and you open up the shop and you load a truck and you get it out to a job site and, or maybe 10 different job sites before you come back. So that panic of like, okay, well, great. Now we're open tomorrow. How are we going to do that safely? How are we going to do that in a way that our people feel confident coming into work? Because it does no good if they come in, but all they can think about is, am I going to get sick? Am I going to die? Am I going to whatever? And so, that was a really quick pivot. It was one of the times I've been most impressed with our team because the way they did come together and collaborate and solve problems, simple things like, all right, we got all these different operations. We don't need to create 30 different protocols for how we're going to operate the showroom. Someone already came up with a great idea. Let's just get it out there and make it available to everyone. And they can slap their logo on it and tweak a few words, however they need to do that. But to quickly be able to implement great ideas and adjust so that we can, do our job successfully. And I, for that whole first year, I loved being able to talk about with other industries, how, we had thousands of people that were coming to work every day and doing their jobs effectively and successfully and actually accelerating the company. And frankly, just having the same kind of, sickness rate of anyone else who was all isolated and sitting at home. I was really proud of that. I was proud of our people who figured out a way to make it happen. And I think, we got the whole industry's got a lot of stories around that probably, but that was definitely a time where I saw us move really quickly and make adjustments and then come out the other side more successful. And, even as we're in this time period now where the industry is kind of down, where housing starts are suppressed. I mean, that's something that I have been thinking, that time period is something I've been thinking more and more about of, what did we do back then? How did we evolve? What did we think about? What did we change? Because maybe there's something we can learn from that and just navigating a little bit of an industry downturn now.
it's incredible because when you go through that, like an extraordinary time as a company and come out on the other side, like the strength of what you end up with is truly impressive, right? So that certainly resonates. It seems like you guys went through something very, very much like that. Our last segment is quick cuts. These are just rapid fire questions. Viscerally shoot from the hip. Biggest myth about the building materials industry?
Biggest myth, easily that how simple and boring and antiquated it is. I think it's one of the most dynamic industries. It is the most dynamic industry I've ever been in. But I think that's the fallacy for sure.
Agreed. Overrated or underrated? The impact of e-commerce on lumber and building materials.
Overrated in the traditional sense, underrated by kind of the nuts and bolts of what it can do.
One book you'd recommend for anyone coming into the industry to do what they need to do in terms of excellence?
Too many to name, but I would say Simon Sinek's Infinite Game.
Yeah, I love that one. Also, you should read Understanding Michael Porter in regards to talking about the market forces that lead competition. It talks a lot about the consolidation, what that means for the two-stepper, what that means for the dealer, what that means for the manufacturer. I think there's a lot of good takeaways for those that are listening.
First thing you do in the morning?
First thing I do in the morning is spend a little bit of time reading the Bible.
Nice.
That's a great answer. That's the first one we've heard one.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, look, I think we've had a really nice conversation today. Steve, I can't thank you enough for your insights and your time talking with us. Really, really thanks from us to you to spend this time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. It was a blast. Todd, I love our industry. Love what, you guys play such an important role in as well. And this podcast is fantastic. I know I've enjoyed getting to know it here recently and appreciate the chance to do this with you today.
Thank you. I'd love to have you back as Kodiak develops and grows or stays the same, whatever it is.
Yeah, let's put a placeholder for 14,000 employees. When they hit there, we
all right.
Yeah.
Count on it.
So there you have it. Steve Swinney, founder of Kodiak Building Products. What a fantastic conversation we had today, Mikey, from learning about the ups and downs of private equity to learning about the growing pains of growing as quickly as they have to understanding how they have a local feel for this just giant corporate juggernaut. I thought was just a really incredible, unique, and interesting business model.
I was very impressed by the model of being locally led, how they let every company, even though they kind of combine, but they let every individual company that they own operate on their own, be locally led. And I think that's a unique model. We talked about, are there other models outside of our industry that do that? And I'm not sure there are. I think he's one of the first to hit this model, and it may be a model that other industries copy. So yes, it was a very interesting conversation. Glad he was able to join us.
We talk about this being a relationship business and this concept of being able to scale, but also allowing for people closest to the customer to make decisions. Of course it works, but it's not really duplicated very much. That being said, next week we meet with the CEO and founder of Acre Building Products, and that should be a really exciting podcast as well. Here's a guy who's doing something totally unique in the manufacturing side of the business that's really caught fire. So stay tuned, and if you like the content, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.